My name's Thomas, and this isn't something I ever thought I'd share. But a year has passed since I walked away, and the silence is louder than ever. Maybe writing it down will help me understand how everything I believed in fell apart, slowly, then all at once. Melissa and I were together for 8 years. Married for 6. To most people, we probably looked like a solid couple. Vacations, dinner parties, smiles for the camera. But behind closed doors, things started to change. Not overnight. Gradually. Like when you don't notice how far the tide has pulled you until you're already out too deep to swim back. It started with the phone. The way she always kept it flipped over. The fake little laughs she'd give when she texted, not the kind she gave me once upon a time. Then there were the work dinners she dressed a little too carefully for. The sudden need for privacy. The emotional distance that kept growing no matter how hard I tried to bridge it. I remember one night, it was raining. She came home late again, said her meeting had run long. Her lipstick was smudged, but her story was polished. And I just stood there, soaked in that quiet moment, knowing everything had changed. I didn't accuse her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at the woman I'd shared a bed with for years and saw someone I didn't recognize. I started sleeping on the couch, telling her it was because of back pain. I stopped asking questions I didn't want to hear answers to. And I began noticing the small things, a second toothbrush in her gym bag, the scent of cologne on her scarf, her laughter on the phone fading into whispers when I entered the room. The truth didn't crash into me like a wave. It seeped in like a draft under a closed door. Cold and steady. Until one morning, I woke up and couldn't lie to myself anymore. I packed a small bag. My passport, some clothes, and an old photo of my parents that Melissa had never bothered to frame. I left my wedding ring on the nightstand. No note. No explanation. Just quiet. I slipped out the door while she was still asleep, and I didn't look back. I didn't go far. Rented a small cabin a few towns over. No social media. No contact with old friends. Just me in the silence. I figured if I disappeared, she wouldn't chase me. And she didn't. Not for a year. But that's when everything changed. And I'll tell you how she came back, broken, haunted by regret, in the next part. Because that moment, I'll never forget the look in her eyes. The cabin I found was about as far from our old life as I could get without crossing a border. It was buried on the edge of a quiet lake town where no one asked questions and no one looked twice at a man who kept to himself. I paid in cash, shopped once a week, and spent most days reading, walking, or sitting on the old wooden deck staring at the water like it held answers. And maybe in some strange way it did. There was something peaceful about the isolation, but also something hollow. Like the world had paused. I wasn't angry. That's what surprises people when I tell this story. I didn't leave because of rage. I left because of clarity. There's something sacred about realizing the person you loved doesn't love you the way you thought. It cracks you open, but it also frees you. I kept replaying little moments in my head, not just the signs of her betrayal, but the early days too. The way she used to tuck her legs up on the couch and lean into me like I was the safest place she knew. The way she laughed at my dumbest jokes. That look she gave me when I proposed. It didn't feel fake back then. That's what hurt the most. The idea that maybe somewhere along the way we both just became strangers living in the same skin. But as much as I tried to let go, I couldn't fully escape the memories. They'd sneak up on me in the quiet, like when the kettle started to whistle and I instinctively reached for 2 mugs instead of 1. Or when I'd catch myself looking at a sunset and wishing she could see it too, before immediately reminding myself she probably already was, just not with me. I never told anyone where I went. Not my parents, not my coworkers, not my friends. I didn't want advice, pity, or explanations. I wanted space. And silence. Because there's a kind of truth that only shows itself when the noise stops. Months passed. Seasons changed. I grew a beard, started sketching again, something I hadn't done since college. I was healing, but it wasn't linear. Some days I felt like I could breathe again. Other days I'd dream about her and wake up with my heart pounding, drenched in a sadness that didn't have a name. And through it all, she never called. Never texted. Never showed up. Until exactly 1 year later. It was the first week of October. The trees were burning gold and red, the air had that sharp bite that said winter wasn't far. I was chopping wood, thinking about making stew, when I heard a car engine pull up the gravel road. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one ever came out here. I wiped my hands on my jeans, stepped around the side of the cabin, and froze. There she was. Melissa. Standing beside a rental car with her coat pulled tight. Her hair wind-blown and her eyes bloodshot like she hadn't slept in days. She looked thinner, older. Like life had carved something out of her that no amount of makeup could cover. She clutched her phone in one hand, keys in the other, like she didn't know which one could save her. We just stared at each other. No words, no tears, just the weight of everything that had been said, and everything that hadn't, hanging between us like smoke. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched as she took a trembling breath, stepped forward, and whispered the words I never expected to hear again. Tom, I ruined everything. Please, please let me explain. And I still didn't say a word. Not yet, because I needed to know who this woman was, the one who shattered me, and the one now begging me to let her speak. In part 3, I'll tell you what she confessed, and why it broke me in a completely different way. I didn't invite her inside right away. I stood there, still holding the axe, not because I felt threatened, not even close, but because I needed something to ground me. My whole body was buzzing, not with anger, not even sorrow anymore, but with something more complicated, disbelief. That after 12 full months of nothing, of total silence, of imagining 100 different versions of her life without me, she'd driven out here, alone. She asked if she could come in. Her voice was rough, like she hadn't spoken much lately. I nodded once and led her through the door of the small cabin, the same one she used to tease me about when I first moved in, called it a hermit's hideaway, when I stopped responding to messages from mutual friends. I poured us both some tea, the only thing I had warm. She didn't touch hers, just sat across from me, on the edge of the chair like she was ready to run again if the words came out wrong. I don't know where to start, she said quietly. I do, I finally replied. Start with the truth. All of it. No editing. I don't want the polite version. Just give me what I never got. Her eyes filled, and for a moment, I could see the weight on her shoulders wasn't just guilt. It was regret, the kind that doesn't fade. The kind that rewires you. She told me she had been seeing someone. That part one already knew. Her body gave it away long before she ever said a word. But what I didn't know, what hit like a cold slap, was who it was. Not a stranger. Not some coworker. It was someone I'd known longer than her. Nate, my oldest friend. Best man at our wedding. The guy who once crashed on my couch for 3 months when his girlfriend kicked him out. The one I trusted like a brother. I remember him telling me how lucky I was to have found someone like Melissa. I believed him. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. Like that made any of it easier to stomach. I was lonely. You were so distant. You were always working, always tired, always thinking about bills and projects. And he was just there. I stared at her. You were lonely? Her face flushed. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying, it wasn't about love. Not with him. It was selfish. And I knew it. What did he tell you when I disappeared? I asked, suddenly needing to know what story had been spun in my absence. She looked down at her hands. He said you'd probably found out and couldn't handle it. That maybe you were off punishing us. That you always did have a temper. That made me laugh. A sharp, humorless sound. I'd never raised a hand to anyone in my life. I didn't even yell during arguments. My silence was my weapon. And I guess they couldn't interpret silence without painting their own version of it. But it didn't last with him, she added quickly. That's what I came to tell you. It fell apart after a month. He started seeing someone else. Someone younger. It turns out he was cheating on me too. Almost immediately. I wanted to feel satisfaction hearing that. I really did. But all I felt was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't go away with sleep. She wiped her eyes. After that, I kept waiting for you to show up. Or at least to text. But you didn't. I looked everywhere. I called your parents. Your coworkers. Nobody knew anything. It was like you just vanished. I did, I said. That was the point. But why? She asked, voice breaking. Why not yell? Why not confront me? Why just disappear? I took a long breath. Because if I said anything, I knew I'd get dragged into explanations. Excuses. Half-truths. Tears. And I didn't want any of it. I didn't want to be convinced of something I already knew wasn't real anymore. So I left before I could forget what it felt like to finally see you for who you were. She didn't argue. Just sat there and took it. Then she whispered something I wasn't expecting. You were right to go. But I was wrong to let you. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because what she didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone, was that in the time since I left I had started to rebuild. Not with someone else, but within myself. I had found a kind of peace. And I wasn't sure if she deserved to disturb it just because she finally saw the wreckage she'd caused. And in the next part I'll tell you the decision I made. One that would either break the last bridge between us, or force her to walk it alone. She stayed the night in the guest room. Not because I invited her to, but because the sun was setting fast and the storm clouds were rolling in. And despite everything, I wasn't cruel. I didn't offer comfort, but I didn't send her out into the storm either. That first night was quiet. We didn't speak again after that conversation. I made a fire. She sat near it in silence. I stayed outside most of the evening, rain slowly soaking through my sweatshirt while I stared at the lake, listening to the wind rattle the trees. I needed to remember who I was before her, who I became without her, because if I allowed her back into my life, even for a moment, I had to know it wouldn't undo everything I'd worked to rebuild. The next morning, she was already up. I walked into the kitchen to find her cleaning dishes that weren't even dirty. She didn't look at me at first. Just said, I had dreams about this place, you know? Every month. Sometimes every week. I imagined finding it. But I always thought you'd be angry if I came. I poured coffee. I'm not angry. That made her turn. You're not. No. I was once. But then I realized something. Anger is still a connection. You only stay angry at people who still matter. That's not where I've been for a long time. She sat down slowly, like the weight of those words hit her deeper than anything else I'd said. We were both quiet for a while. Just the sound of rain against the windows and the clock ticking above the stove. She finally asked, Do you want to know what happened after you left? I shrugged. If you need to tell it. So she told me. All of it. After I left, she said she didn't even notice at first. She thought I was out for groceries or clearing my head. When hours passed and I didn't answer texts, she got worried. Not about me, about being caught. She searched the apartment, found the wedding ring I'd left behind, and said her heart sank. Not because she missed me, not immediately, but because it meant the easy escape route she thought she had, me forgiving her, was gone. She said Nate stuck around for a little while, but it was never love. It wasn't even affection. It was chaos. It was adrenaline. It was a distraction. And when I disappeared, he grew cold, distant. She started to see the cracks. The moments when he mocked her, minimized her, reminded her that she wasn't exactly wife material. She told me she spent her 31st birthday alone, staring at our wedding photo, wondering how everything she thought she wanted ended with her crying on the floor in a dress she bought to impress a man who barely remembered her middle name. She went on like that for a long time, month after month of unraveling. Her friends, the ones who egged her on to follow her heart and find herself, all started drifting away when things got messy. The social media posts about empowerment faded. She said even her own sister stopped answering calls after Melissa broke down in the middle of a family dinner, sobbing over a plate of cold pasta while her nephew stared wide-eyed. That's when I knew, she said, eyes fixed on a crack in the cabin floor. I traded the one man who always stood by me for noise, for something temporary, something shallow. I nodded slowly. That's the thing about temporary. It always leaves. She looked up. Do you hate me? No, I said. But I don't feel what you're hoping I'll feel. And what's that? Longing. Nostalgia. That ache that makes people run back to old flames thinking they can fix what's broken. I felt that once, but I buried it out here. In every sunrise I watched without you. In every evening I cooked a meal for one and didn't mind it. In every moment I remembered who I was before we were a we. Her lip trembled. So this is it? I looked out the window. The rain was letting up. The trees were dripping, swaying gently in the wind. I don't know, I said. That's up to both of us, isn't it? Because the truth was, and I hadn't admitted this to myself until that moment, part of me still cared. Not about the relationship. That was gone. But about her as a person. I didn't want her destroyed. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. I wanted both of us to stop carrying the weight of the past like a boulder strapped to our backs. And as we sat there, two broken people in a quiet cabin far from the world we once built, I realized something else. Sometimes closure isn't loud. It doesn't come with slammed doors or dramatic speeches. Sometimes it's just a deep breath and the ability to look at someone and know you've already said everything without speaking a single word. In part 5, I'll tell you what happened the day she asked if she could stay and what I told her that left her speechless. She asked me if she could stay. Not for a few hours. Not just to talk. She meant really stay, to be here, in this cabin, with me. She said she didn't have anywhere else to go. Her apartment lease had ended. She was couch surfing. Her job was barely hanging on and the friends who once cheered her on had vanished like smoke. And as I looked at her, this tired, older, distant version of the woman I once adored, I realized how strange it was that she was now the one asking for permission to enter my world. I didn't answer her right away. I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it wide. The air outside was still damp from the storm and everything smelled like pine and earth. I stepped onto the porch and waited. She followed, arms crossed against the cold, eyes flicking to mine with nervous glances like she was expecting rejection in every breath I took. I need you to understand something, I said finally. You're not asking to stay with the man you remember. That version of me died the day I left. I buried him with the life we built. What you see now, who I am now, is someone you haven't met. She looked like she wanted to argue but thought better of it. I'm not trying to pick up where we left off, she said. I'm not asking for us to be anything we were. I don't know how to live without guilt anymore. And I thought if I could just be near you, maybe some of the weight would lift. And that's when it hit me, she wasn't looking for forgiveness. Not really. She was looking for relief. For shelter. Not just from the rain or her ruined life, but from herself. I sat down on the porch steps and motioned for her to do the same. She hesitated, then joined me, our shoulders a foot apart, a space that felt like a chasm filled with everything we never said. Melissa, I said carefully, I spent the last year in silence. No distractions. No noise. I rebuilt myself from the ground up. And what I found is, I don't need to hate you. I don't need to love you either. I just don't need you. She flinched like I'd slapped her, but I kept going. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. But I've built something out here that isn't built on pain. It's quiet. It's steady. It's mine. Letting you in, even temporarily, feels like tearing open a wound that finally closed. She didn't cry. That surprised me. She just nodded slowly like she knew that was the only answer I could give. Then she said something I didn't expect. Can I stay one more night? Not in your space. Just outside. In the car if I have to. I'm not ready to go back yet. Not until I can face the mess I made. I watched her. Really watched her. And for the first time I didn't see my wife. I didn't see the betrayal. I didn't even see the regret. I saw a woman who had built her life on fragile illusions and watched every single one collapse under its own weight. I nodded once. You can stay one more night. But after that you have to go. Not because I'm cruel, but because I'm not your recovery plan. You have to rebuild your life the same way I did, with nothing but time, truth, and silence. That night, I sat by the fire alone while she slept in the guest room again. And as the flames danced in front of me, I realized something important. I wasn't waiting for justice anymore. I wasn't seeking closure. I wasn't hoping she'd change. I had moved on. Quietly. Fully. Completely. And even if she hadn't, that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. In part 6, I'll tell you about the morning she left and the letter she slipped under my door. What it said changed something I thought was unshakable, not in the way you might expect, but in a way that reminded me how deeply a scar can still feel tender long after it's healed. The morning she left was quiet, like the air itself knew it was carrying something final. There was no knock at my door, no long goodbye, no emotional plea for one last chance. When I stepped into the kitchen, she was already gone. Her car tracks cut faint lines into the damp gravel, already beginning to blur with the morning mist. And there, tucked beneath the door, was a single envelope with my name on it, just Thomas, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in a long time. For a few minutes I just stared at it. My hand hovered above the paper, not because I was afraid of what it said, but because I wasn't sure if I wanted to feel anything at all. I had made peace with the silence. With the distance. With the way everything fell apart without any dramatic crescendo. She had already said more than I ever expected her to. But something in me needed to know how she chose to leave. So I opened it. The letter was short. Messy. A few sentences scratched out and rewritten. She'd clearly struggled to say what she needed. That somehow made it feel more real. I know I don't deserve another word from you, let alone this space you gave me. I used to think closure was something people owed each other, but now I think it's something we have to build ourselves. I don't expect your forgiveness, Tom. But I want you to know this, the silence you left behind, it was louder than any fight we could have had. It echoed through everything. And I finally understand why you left without saying a word, because anything you might have said would have been drowned in my own excuses. You gave me the gift of facing myself. I don't know who I'll become yet, but I promise you, she'll be better. Not for you. Just for the woman I should have been a long time ago. I read it twice, then folded it and set it on the table. I didn't feel some grand sense of closure, no wave of relief or clarity. What I felt was something far simpler, stillness. A final stillness, like someone shutting the last page of a long, painful book you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years. I sat outside with my coffee as the sun rose, casting warm light over the lake. There was something different about it that morning. Not because she'd come and gone, but because I hadn't chased or clung or begged for understanding. I had held the line, the one I drew in the dirt the day I walked away. She would go on, hopefully wiser, hopefully stronger. But so would I. Not just as someone who had been betrayed and survived it, but as someone who chose himself when the world told him to hold on a little longer. That letter wasn't an apology wrapped in romance. It was a eulogy. For the version of her that I used to love. And for the version of me that tolerated being unseen. In part 7, I'll tell you what happened 3 months later when I ran into someone from our past who told me something that shook me in a way I didn't expect. Not because it was cruel or shocking, but because it reminded me how deeply my absence had echoed through lives I thought had already moved on. 3 months passed after she left that letter. I kept it, but I never reread it. Not out of bitterness, more like I didn't need to. The words had settled like dust on old shelves. Her presence had finally left my cabin, but the memory of her visit lingered like smoke. Still, life had taken on a new rhythm again. I was rebuilding the porch railing, adding a garden bed behind the cabin, finally learning how to make sourdough bread from scratch. They were small things, but they felt like victories. Every time I finished something, it reminded me that I was still here. Still moving. Still breathing without her. Then one morning while I was in town grabbing supplies, I heard someone call my name. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the small hardware store like it was meant only for me. I turned and saw someone I hadn't thought about in over a year, Eric. He used to be part of our old friend group. He was the calm one, the guy who always avoided drama. We hadn't spoken since I left, and honestly, I assumed most of our shared friends had moved on or picked a side. He looked surprised to see me. Not because I was alive, Melissa hadn't spread any rumors, thank God, but because, in his words, you look like you made peace with something most people never do. We grabbed coffee at the diner nearby. I almost didn't want to. There was something about reconnecting with anyone from that old life that made me uneasy, but curiosity pulled me in. He didn't ask where I'd gone or why I left. He already knew enough not to poke at things that weren't his to fix. But about halfway through the conversation, he said something that froze me mid-sip. You know, Melissa changed a lot after you left. Not just her job or her routines. I mean everything. She started volunteering, stopped drinking, even cut off Nate for good. I saw her a few weeks ago at the grocery store. She looked, I don't know, different. Older. Quieter. Sadder, maybe? I didn't say anything. I didn't know how to respond to that. Then he added, she told me she still talks to you every morning. I looked up. What do you mean? She said she writes letters. Every day. Never sends them. Just writes them and keeps them in this little box by her window. She said it's the only way she can make sense of anything anymore. She doesn't expect you to forgive her. She said she wouldn't even accept it if you did. But she talks to you like you're still sitting across the table, like you still listen. I didn't feel sadness. Or pity. I didn't even feel a strange sense of pride that maybe my silence had left a mark deeper than my words ever could. What I felt was a kind of distance. Like hearing about someone else's life through a fogged-up window. Melissa had once been my entire world, and now she was a story someone else was telling me. Eric asked me if I ever thought about going back. I shook my head. Going back to what? A memory that can't hold its shape? A version of me that doesn't exist anymore. He smiled and nodded. Yeah, I figured. That conversation stayed with me for days. Not because of what she was doing or saying, but because I realized something important. Even if she had changed, even if she'd grown, it didn't mean we belonged in the same chapter again. Growth doesn't always lead people back together. Sometimes it just leads them forward in separate directions. And in the final part, I'll tell you how this chapter of my life truly ended and what I found when I opened my own letterbox weeks later, addressed in familiar handwriting, with one last message that finally and completely let us both go. The letter came on a Tuesday. I hadn't been expecting mail out here. Most days the mailbox is just empty space and dust. But that morning, as I walked down the gravel road to check it like I always did, there it was. A single white envelope, no return address, just my name written in the kind of handwriting you don't forget no matter how many seasons pass. I stood in the driveway for a long time, the wind brushing past like it was trying to move me along. I didn't go inside right away. I sat on the front steps with the letter in my hands, sunlight warming my shoulders, and took my time. This felt different. It didn't carry the weight of guilt or desperation. It wasn't taped together with apologies. It felt final. When I opened it, I could tell she had taken her time writing it. The paper smelled faintly like rosemary, something she used to plant on our windowsill, and the ink was slightly smudged in places, as if she'd paused more than once before finishing her thoughts. Thomas? I promised myself I wouldn't send any of these letters. But this one feels different. I don't want anything in return. Not your forgiveness. Not your attention. I just want you to know that I found peace in a way I never thought I would. I spent months trying to rewrite the past in my head. Trying to be the woman I should have been when you needed me most. But eventually, I realized something. You didn't need me to become someone else for you. You needed me to become someone better for myself. And I did. I'm not broken anymore. I'm not lost. I'm working in a quiet town now, near the coast. I teach art classes to kids who remind me what it means to create without fear. I go for long walks. I adopted an old dog. I laugh again, really laugh, the way I used to when we first met. And every now and then when I sit down with a cup of tea, I think of you. Not with pain. Not with regret. Just with gratitude. For walking away. For not yelling. For letting the silence speak louder than your anger ever could. You taught me something I'll carry forever. When you love someone, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is leave. I hope you're well. I hope you're still watching those sunsets. I hope you found someone who sees you, really sees you, the way I didn't. With peace? Melissa. I folded the letter and tucked it into the old drawer beside my bed where I keep the things that shaped me, my father's watch, a photo of my dog as a puppy, the key from our first apartment. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sadness. I felt stillness. The quiet kind that follows after a storm when everything smells fresh and the world feels clean again. That was over 6 months ago. Since then, I finished rebuilding the cabin. Planted a small greenhouse. I've made new friends in town, real ones, not tied to the person I used to be. I even started teaching a class at the local rec center, showing people how to build with their hands again. There's a woman named Claire who sometimes brings extra tools just because she knows I always forget mine. We laugh a lot. It's easy. There's no pressure to be anything but present. And sometimes in the late evenings when the light is gold and the lake is still, I sit on the porch and smile, not because everything went the way I wanted it to, but because it didn't. It went the way it needed to. I used to think closure came from confrontation. But now I know it comes from choosing yourself quietly, again and again, until one day you look around and realize you're free. And I am. Finally.